All right, well, let's get to our notes and get to the book of Ecclesiastes. And I trust we'll enjoy some good study here this evening. We're in chapter 2 of Ecclesiastes. We have been following through, right through Solomon's thoughts as he's dealing with what is valuable in life. Again, maybe just pointing out on the beginning of the notes every once in a while, it's helpful for us to remember where we've been and what this is all about. Solomon's writes about living life meaningfully. What is it that's valuable in this life? What provides meaning to what we're doing here? And so ultimately, really that subtitle, being satisfied with what God has given us. And we're going to run into really one of the first major preaching points, or if I want to put it this way, satisfaction points in the book of Ecclesiastes, if I don't get too long-winded, all right? We'll get there by the end of the chapter. It's at the end of chapter 2. So tonight, as you can see on our notes here, we come to verses 12 to 26. This is Solomon giving a report now of what he's investigated really almost thus far, but in particular, end of chapter 1, beginning at verse number 18 is where he digs into, verse number 12. Verse number 12 of chapter 1, where he looks at wisdom. Now again, this is not biblical wisdom that has God connected to it. This is wisdom that man would come up with. They're good thinking. Can I put it this way? Man, because he's made in the image of God, can think some halfway decent thoughts, all right, though tainted by sin. And so man tries to figure out what life's all about. And so they study, they reason, why are we here? And he found out that man's wisdom really doesn't give you the answer. And so he said, all right, and this is what we looked at last week. Well then, let's turn to non-wisdom, folly. Let's go maybe beyond wisdom, beyond human reasoning. Maybe there's something, in the existential, beyond reason, that would give us answers to life. And so that was the first part of chapter 2, down through verse 11, 1 through 11. And again, he came back with that, maybe we could read in verse 11. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do. And behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. So as he looks at mirth, all right, part of folly, let's just have fun, all right? So since we can't understand what's happening in life, we can't reason and figure out the value of life through human reasoning, well then just enjoy life, let's party. Well, that didn't give really any satisfaction. So then he says, oh, how about enterprise? So remember, he built all these great works. Verse 4, I made me great works. He essentially built his own little culture, his own little city, had servants, had built gorgeous gardens, and yet even that he found very dissatisfying. So now we come to verse 12, and through the end of chapter 2, it's like he's writing the synopsis or the final analysis of this study. Does wisdom and non-wisdom, do they give us any value to life? And he's already given us clues to the answer. So what I've done on our notes is I've kind of given what would be my either translation or interpretation of the verse, if I can put it that way, to help give you some understanding of his thought processes. Look on the notes, you can see that we have a couple of things that are kind of set in, all right, tabbed in there, and the outline really comes to the middle of verse 17 and 18 as a really strong point. You can see on the outline, therefore, you see that therefore. There's a second therefore down in verse 20 on the notes, where we draw some conclusions, and then we have essentially a whole stop to the thought. And now for the first time, he's going to tantalize our taste buds. Can I put it that way? He's putting a carrot in front of us to say, let's insert God in here for just a minute. And I'm going to tell you what happens as we analyze wisdom and non-wisdom if we put God in the picture for just a minute. So it's like he's getting us hungry for all the conclusions that we won't get to until chapter 12, all right? So we got a ways to go yet. But he does this throughout the book, which is a lot of fun. It keeps us hungry for knowing the truth and what is the actual answer to what's the meaning of life. Okay, so we'll walk through these verses. Let's read. What I'll do is I'll read the text, and then we'll run to the notes and then come back to the text, all right? So back and forth as we go. So verse number 12. And so I turned myself to behold wisdom and madness and folly. So wisdom and non-wisdom. He uses the word madness and folly together to describe all of what would make up what we call non-wisdom. For what can the man do that cometh after the king? Even that which hath been already done. Now, what is Solomon saying here? Again, in my simple words, verse 12, if Solomon, in his study, now who was Solomon? Don't forget, he's the wisest man in all the world. Even God commented that there was no one like him after him. Okay, we can, because God said so, know that Solomon was the wisest man that ever lived outside of Jesus Christ. All right, so sorry you use that have a couple of young kids, you think you got a genius on your hand. Well, he's not going to be Solomon, or she's not going to be Solomon-S. All right, okay? Makes sense. All right, just for fun. Okay, so here's Solomon. We understand he's the wisest man on all the earth. He's writing. It appears as though he's writing not at the beginning of his life, somewhere down the road quite a ways. So he's not only gained knowledge that the Lord has given to him in a supernatural fashion in answer to his prayer, but he's also gained a lot of life experience. And he is saying, I have not found the meaning of life. So the question really of verse 12, as you can see at the end of my notes here on verse 12, who else in this world can? If Solomon can't, if Solomon in his analysis of the world, looking at all that takes place under the sun, taking God out of the picture, if he can't find any meaning, no one else is going to, right? Wow, that's really hopeful. Thanks, Solomon. Okay, but that's the point. He wants us to be arrested to the reality that no, there is no answers to this life from this life. The answers to life come from God alone. The truth, okay? So that's the question. But so that's his like proposition really at the beginning of the report. No, you're going to come to the end and be discouraged by looking at this report, just so you know. That's what Solomon's saying. Verse 13 and beginning of verse 14. Then I saw that wisdom excelleth folly, like or as far as light excelleth darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head. I don't know about you, but that sounds really funny to me. I'd say, well, I'm glad. This okay. It's a figure of speech, obviously, but okay, laugh with me. I just think that I'm glad it's in his head, all right? So then the opposite, all right? The wise man's eyes is in his head, but the fool's man's eyes, no, it doesn't say that. But the fool walketh in darkness. It's as if his eyes are closed. He can't see. What's he saying here? Verse 13 and 14a, as we look on our notes, wisdom and folly compare to each other like light and darkness do. What do we consider generally in the comparison between light and darkness? We don't consider them the same. We consider them opposite, right? All right, what dispels darkness? Light. Light. Now, there's this obviously there is obvious spiritual ramifications that we can talk about light and darkness because God chose to use that analogy to help us to understand. He is the light. He dispels the darkness of sin. God, in the beginning, in creation, God created light before he created sun. Our scientists today still don't know how exactly to define light. They can describe a lot about it. We enjoy it, don't we? We're sitting in some light tonight. It's not like sunlight. All right, you understand. But so we look at them as opposite. And that's the comparison that Solomon is trying to make here. Even from a human plane, wisdom is the opposite of folly. That's why I tried in our notes the last couple weeks to describe it as wisdom and non-wisdom. They are opposites. And he goes on to really give the description of what that means. So that's what he talks about. The wise man's eyes are in their head. And so look at the notes. A wise man has at least the ability to see when danger is coming. So he's thought through life enough, and he knows some things to avoid. He's learned, for instance, that for me to party and get drunk doesn't help me in any ways. In fact, brings ruin and destruction. Life has taught him that. Does that make sense? So wisdom at least helps him foresee the evil and hides himself to a degree. Now, what does the fool do? Well, the fool, he doesn't even want to look. He's living for the pleasure of the moment, and so he stumbles. Now, All right, so we say, yes, maybe Solomon is saying wisdom is the thing. Maybe I should study more philosophy. And yet, what does he say at the end of verse 14? Notice I had to stop in the middle of the verse, but his thought continues. And I myself perceived also that one event happeneth to them all. So Solomon is saying, whether you're really wise, you've listened to people that have studied life and figured it all out and know what's best, know that the family is better than divorce because of the fruit of it. And yet, what does he say here? One event happens to them all. So as you look at our notes, yet, here's the reality under the sun. It doesn't matter if you have human wisdom or you have human folly. Verse 14b, all right, that part that I just read, and now I'm going to read verse 15. All experience the same thing. All of us experience the same happenings. Verse 15. Then said I in my heart, as it happeneth to the fool, so it happeneth even to me. And he's considering himself wise. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart that this also is vanity. We would see it in some of the big picture things that he talked about at the very beginning of chapter 1. It doesn't matter whether I'm wise or I'm foolish. The tornado wiped out my house just like my foolish neighbor's house. It all happens. What did it help that, okay, so I just lost more money because I was careful with my property and now the tornado's just wiped it out. So from the human plane, Solomon is saying, wait a second, it doesn't really matter if I have human wisdom or not, or if I enjoy folly or not. It seems like all things happen the same to everybody. There's a lot of what appears to be chance happening here. At the end of the day, it doesn't seem, and he only discourages us more. Verse 16. And for there is no remembrance of the wise more than of the fool forever. Okay, thought experiment for just a second. Can you name me one wise man from 1820? How about can you give me one fool from 1820? Now, I'm sure we could study and figure out probably who. All right, but do you understand the point? If at the end of the day, would human wisdom help? Well, it doesn't seem to help. They're both dead. They're gone, and for the vast majority of the world, we don't care. Now, please don't be discouraged. That's not my heart, all right? We're talking about life without God, okay? So this is almost hard to preach, if I can put it that way. But looking at it from a human plane, I don't care who was wise or dumb in 1820. It doesn't matter to me. Well, actually it does, but it doesn't matter to me. Okay, you understand? So from the worldly perspective, it's like it doesn't seem to make of any value whether you're wise or non-wise. He goes on. Seeing that which now is, in the days to come shall all be forgotten. And how dieth the wise man? He dies as the fool. So back in our notes. So not only do all experience the same happenings, it doesn't seem to help whether you're wise or non-wise, and all are forgotten, but at the end of the day, the humanly wise and the humanly fools, they're all dead. We're all stuck. We're going to die. And you know what the statistic is, right? 1 out of 1 die. It's going to happen to all of us. So that's where Solomon's at. Now, notice from the human plane then his conclusion. And here we come to verse 17 and the beginning of verse 18. If that's all that life has, it all happens to all of us. 20 years from now, who will remember what good I've done? And one day I'm going to be dead just like the fool. Oh, maybe he died a few years ahead of me because of his foolishness, but I'm dead too. What's the conclusion? Verse 17. Therefore, I hated life. Because that the work that is wrought under the sun is grievous unto me. For all is vanity and vexation of spirit. Yea, I hated all my labor which I had taken under the sun. Remember, he had just done in verses 4 to 11 of chapter 2, all these great magnificent works. And yet he's coming to this conclusion, I hate this. So you can see, therefore I hate life and I hate work. It doesn't seem to have any purpose, is what Solomon is saying. And now, the reason this is really important for us, especially as believers to come back to this touch point, is because you and I live with a far different perspective on life, do we not? We're going to see it here at the end of verse 24 to 26. He's going to insert a little bit of God into the thought here. But let us not forget that verse 17 and 18a is why people commit suicide. Why people get angry at life. Why they go party. What's more to do? There doesn't seem there, and what they are saying by all of that, why they go to drugs. They're basically saying, I can't find meaning to life. I hate this. And what stands, Christian, you know the answer already, but what stands as the big answer to all of that? It's God. You see how Solomon is driving us all to understand that God is the only answer to life, to its value, to its meaning, to its purpose. And that is so important. Now, believer, the other application point for us to consider for just a moment. If this really is the end of life without God, that I just hate life and I hate work, then don't love this life too much. Don't love what you do too much. Too much, if I can put it in comparison to God, don't love it at all. Hate it. Your love for God and your understanding of who God is and how He impacts every area of your life should drive you away from ever pursuing what the world pursues to try to find happiness and meaning. You know better. Why would you do that? And yet, don't forget, we have our flesh that wants to. So right now, I'm in the throes. Drew is 6 going on 7 here. And we have to, and this is the point to catch it. I'm trying to help him understand. I mean, I saw it with the older kids, doing it all over again. Kids are kids, aren't they? All right, there's things you... And I had to help, trying to help little Drew to see beyond his little desires for his toys and his things and what's most important. So Drew, it's really good that we give a gift to somebody else. It doesn't have to be always yours. Because God gifted you with eternal life, Drew. And we live a generous life because Jesus has been generous to us. You see, even in a child's mind, they can start understanding some of these big principles. I don't live for my next truck. Or for Drew, it's for the ATV. He already wants an ATV. All right, so that ATV, Drew, won't bring you happiness. It won't. And we have, believer, so, okay, pick on Pastor Anderson. That 1963 Corvette won't bring you happiness, Anderson. It may be cool, but it won't bring you, don't go there. Does that make sense? So don't pursue what the world pursues. And all areas of wisdom or non-wisdom. Well, I'm going to be the smartest guy at work. No, that's not the purpose of life. Yes, do your job well for the Lord, but don't just live to be the smartest guy at work. Okay, all those things. Okay, so that's kind of a first conclusion. Really what's happening here is there's a little bit of a turn. So like Hebrew often does, Hebrew thinkers do, he's come to a conclusion and then he's going to draw away from that conclusion again. So not like Western thinkers, we put the conclusion always at the end. No, it's partway through as well. So don't forget that's the conclusion. Now let's keep on reading in verse 18. So I hated all my labor which I had taken under the sun, because I should leave it unto the man that shall be after me. And who knoweth whether he shall be a wise man or a fool? Yet shall he have rule over all my labor wherein I have labored, and wherein I have showed myself wise under the sun. This also is vanity. So notice here, and I have some parentheses here, and then some notes on our notes. So note, man without God is hopeless. That really is how to put verse 17 and 18a. You hate life, you hate work. Man without God is hopeless. Now, note at the end of verse 6, or partway through verse 16, I'm sorry, he'd referenced something that it's a really critical thought. For there is no remembrance of the wise more than the fool. And notice that next word, for, 2 words, forever. All of us innately, we are, I'm a dog guy a little bit. We are wired for this. All right, you're not dogs, just so you understand. But God has made us, there are things that make us human. And one of the things that makes us something greater than any animal is that we know innately that there's something more to life than this life here. So even the unbeliever that's fleeing from God, that doesn't want anything to do with God, his heart's still telling him you're going the wrong direction. You're going to live beyond this life forever. If all there is this life, then why do I matter? Why does it matter to me what happens after me? Does that make sense? And yet there's in our hearts this understanding. It's like men build monuments. They build corporations. And it's to their name. I mean, they put their names on buildings, on stadiums. Okay. They want, and that's some of that is in this expression that they know that there's something beyond just this life. And they're trying to find the value of the life, all right? And so notice that theme forever. Now again, you notice on our notes, 2:16, that word forever, it's hearkening, it's pointing ahead to verse 3:11, chapter 3, verse 11, which we've already pointed out as one of the main theme verses of the book, that God has put eternity in our hearts, all right? So he's referencing that thought there in verse 16. So God gave, notice our notes, God gave man a heart longing for eternity. And I'm using this in a really broad sense. He knows that he's going to live eternally. There's just that sense about him. That's what I mean by he's wired that way. Romans chapter 1 references that, and chapter 2 references that. That we just know that there's something more to this life than this life. That we are going to live forever. We suppress truth. That's Romans 1, suppress truth in our hearts because of our sinful nature. And so we see here this reference and note that God gives a longing in the heart. Now, praise the Lord for that, because that's what God begins to use to draw a soul to Christ. They know that there's something more. So here's Solomon then. He's saying, oh, I've done all these great works. What's going to happen after I'm gone? The guy that's going to get all this, of course, for Solomon, we think of directly his son, and his son was somewhat foolish, wasn't he? Even for all that he taught Rehoboam, like a lot of the book of Proverbs, unfortunately, Rehoboam followed in the steps of his father and his father's sins. Isn't that amazing? And so he references, as I read those verses then, you can see now back outside of the parentheses, 2:18b, 19, and I haven't read verse 21, but all is left to others who may not value what is left. So Solomon builds this great city, the amazing temple, but who knows what will happen to it after he's gone? We all know the stories. The guy that builds up his wealth, hands it off to his son, dies, and what does the son do it? Squanders it, wastes it, uses it for something totally opposite of what his dad would have used it for. Make sense? Frustration. So if you're again, we're back now to the human plane, and Solomon's saying, somehow man knows that there's something beyond his life, and so they try to build monuments to themselves, but what's going to happen after they're gone? You might end up with a fool. And in fact, if we looked at life and we're honest, we'd say that that's probably the normal pattern, is that the fool gets it instead of the wise person. Okay? Oh, this terrible life. So verse 20. Therefore I went about to cause my heart to despair. So he's coming to another simple conclusion. Let me just despair of life. Of all the labor which I took under the sun. And then verse 21, which is really a part of verse 19. For there is a man whose labor is in wisdom and in knowledge and in equity. So he's humanly wise, yet to a man that hath not labored therein shall he leave it for his portion. This also is vanity and great evil. So a man has studied all of his life to really understand life well, and he leaves all this knowledge, writes a textbook. 2 generations later, who's reading his textbook? No one. Oh, we've gone beyond that wisdom now. Isn't that something? So we see here, He despairs of work even. Why is it that the guy down the line from you at work can't wait for the weekend? Because he sees no value in what he's doing. And the only reason he's there is so he has enough money to have what he considers some kind of happy moment on the weekend or on vacation or in retirement. So really, in many ways, in America in particular, retirement has become a god. I'm going to somehow I'll live to have pleasure. And then they are so discouraged when they hit retirement and their body's broken and they can't enjoy life anymore. And then they're mad at God. Right? That's what life leads to when you take God out of the picture. So I'm going to stop here tonight, and we'll get to verses 22 and 23 and then the end the rest of the way. Kind of a discouraging moment, but let us not forget. Let us add God to the picture always. Life without God is hopeless. With God, there's purpose. And we're going to come to this wonderful, sweet conclusion in the next several verses. All right, let's close in a word of prayer. Father, thank you for this good study. And Lord, help us to use this to understand those that are around us. No wonder people despair of life. No wonder they hate their work, they hate their life, because God's not there. Lord, help us to be tools in your hand to share who God is and the value of life with God. May we become passionate about helping others insert God in their life, to come to know Christ as their Savior and follow God with great joy and delight the rest of their life. In your name we pray.